Hello, everybody. I am Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope, and welcome back to what I watched recently, Water. Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe is a sort of OVA spin-off based on a series of one-shots that Araki did based on his self-insert character, Rohan Kishibe, from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. This is a pretty fun little short series of episodes. I think there was like 4 in total. Each one is simply Rohan sitting in a cafe, talking to someone else, and telling an interesting little bizarre adventure, if you will, that he went on. The usual premise of the episode is Rohan is doing something completely everyday, normal, going to the gym, looking at buying a house, etc., 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 and then some going to a church in Italy, and then some crazy, wacky thing happens, some supernatural event happens, and he has to, react to it and kind of usually solve the problem, or at least get the fuck out of Dodge. It's fun, it's short, and it does a great job of creating large amounts of tension based on just, totally everyday normal events. Pokemon Advanced, I only watched in my ongoing attempt to have never dropped an anime. The less I say about this, the better. It is just fucking terrible. I think the best thing it has going for it is it has objectively the best Pokemon girl, May, in it, but that is about it. It is super boring. The episodes just drag on and waste time. They're all incredibly repetitive. Usually the gang is traveling, then they encounter some Pokemon or person with a problem. Team Rocket interjects, wasting your time, and then after Team Rocket is sent off in a minute, they solve the problem or the Pokemon or whatever, who gives a shit. Almost the entire series is just the same fucking thing. Team Rocket, who I used to like as a kid, is actually the worst part about this show because they have nothing to do with anything. They're usually not the central conflict of the episodes. They just show up because it's like the show feels like they have to be in every episode. And they, in this one, just kind of get dismissed within a minute or two. It's not enjoyable. As it gets later into the series, closer to the Battle Frontier, the Battle Frontier episodes are marginally better, but the whole thing is a real slog. There are some good episodes. There were 3 or 4 actual good ones, like when James goes to his summer house, that and and the gang is there, and then they make a pact. That one's kind of fun. Or when May fights Brock in a Pokemon in a contest battle. That's pretty fun. But by and large, not a real fan of this, and I'm glad it's over. But the ending really fucking pissed me off, though, because Ash randomly decides to enter a Pokemon contest, goes up against May, and then they fucking tie, which is awful, because Ash was using a fucking Grass-type Pokemon against May's Fire-type Pokemon, so it just has to completely throw out type advantage for enable this to happen, and the show is so insistent on jerking off Ash's dick that at the end they tie and split the ribbon, where Ash has no fucking contest experience at all and was at type disadvantage. It is insulting that is how that ended. Fuck this show. Morose Mononokean is about a guy who gets beset by a yokai, and he ends up contacting an exorcist who solves his yokai problem, but in exchange, he ends up having to work at the exorcist shop called the Mononokean for the guy who owns the shop, who is apparently the dude who sits behind him in class. It kind of reminds me of a sort of less serious, more lighthearted version of Holic. The early episodes are pretty fucking boring, if I'm being honest with you, and it kind of picks up towards the later half. I don't think it ever gets great, and I don't think the storylines ever become terribly interesting. It feels like there's more going on, and it almost feels like the show's building up to it. There's kind of an implication that the main character's dad, I'm going to assume, because of the reaction to his last name, might be someone in the yokai community. And yeah, he seems to have some kind of weird magic powers, I guess. The show itself doesn't really address it, but yeah, it seems like the show's going somewhere, so I'm kind of interested in where it's going. But season 1 wasn't great. Dragon Ball Super was actually a lot better than I thought it would be. It manages to create satisfying character arcs for the majority of the secondary and even some of the tertiary characters. Really, the only one that gets left behind is Goku. So the whole main cast gets a good arc, even the antagonists. Well, most of the antagonists. I think Zamasu is a little, but yeah. So the arcs are all pretty enjoyable. It's actually like surprisingly funny. Even like the dumb gag episode with the Dr. Slump cameos was surprisingly funny, and they managed to create some really interesting character drama and some nice dramatic tension, especially during the Goku Black arc. I think my biggest issues with it are that the fights are just, most of them, some of them are good, most of them are really fucking boring. I think the problem with them, it mainly stems from the fact that as a series, Dragon Ball Super itself is not a specifically like technical series, so you don't really understand the like thought processes of the characters throughout the whole fights. Sometimes they do it more than I would have expected, but they only go like halfway on it. But on the other hand, the other way to do a fight scene is like constant like spectacle and like all of these like exciting hype moments where the characters kind of go back and forth. But they do that to a lesser extent also, but they only do it like halfway too. So it doesn't fully commit to like a mechanical, technical like fight where you understand the character's motivations and thought processes, but it doesn't fully commit to being all about like spectacle and power and hype moments. So it ends up as sort of like a toned down fight where two characters just like ineffectually punch each other for like 10 minutes. Like that's a big issue with the fights in the show itself. It feels like nothing has any weight, especially during the Tournament of Power arc. But it does introduce a lot of interesting characters with interesting power sets. And I did enjoy basically all of the newly introduced characters. Again, Zamasu's a little, like, he's okay. I don't think he's great. Fucking loved Jiren. I know that's controversial, because I remember when the show was coming out, everyone hated on Jiren. Fucking loved Jiren. Jiren's so cool. But yeah, I really think the show does Goku dirty. He has no character arcs. If anything, I feel like he's regressed in his maturity over time, because I think they tried to lean in too heavily to the comedy aspect in Goku's character, and it ends up like devaluing him as a character. And I think Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan is stupid, but understandable. I mean, it makes sense. You know, you go Super Saiyan God, then you go Super Saiyan and fly that form. That's fine. I thought Blue Evolved was cool. My final issue, I think, is I really don't like Ultra Instinct. And I know exactly where my issue comes from, because I was thinking about this during like the end of the show where I'm like, this is fucking boring, is that the issue with Ultra Instinct is that in almost all of the previous transformations, there was either some ritual or pomp and circumstance, or in the even better transformations, the characters were sort of in an emotional, like, dire straits, you know, where they had to, like, even with Blue Evolved, like, Vegeta had to go through, like, like, he had to dig deep and think about all of the promises and friends he had made promises to, and like his family and how he had to save the universe. Whereas Ultra Instinct triggers 3 times, so it loses the dramatic, oh shit, Goku has a new transformation thing that they do with other transformations, because he does it 3 times on this. It loses that, but also it only triggers when Goku's getting his ass kicked, and so it ends up coming off like they're afraid of having Goku get his ass kicked. Like, they write themselves into a corner with characters like Jiren and Kefla, where there's no fucking way he could win, so they just make up shit like kids in a playground so Goku can pull a win off. And I think that actually kind of bogs down the show a little bit, because I don't think that's required. Like, I think it would have been okay to let Goku lose, or okay to let him, like, so he doesn't need his one-on-one moments. Like, I think if anything, Goku not being able to surpass everyone he meets the second he meets them is actually more interesting, because it gives him something to aspire from. Kind of like a properly dealt with Monaka, like a real Monaka in the forms of like Kefla and Jiren. Like, he's strong, but he's not there yet, and there's still more for him to do, and so he has to work together. And they did that at the end, but I think they were like so committed to giving Goku his one-on-one that it just ends up sort of like undermining the whole point of everything, because it's like, yo, Goku's the coolest, oh, but he can't do it alone. And it's like, he almost could have done it alone if he had better organs. Next up, I watched the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie. What I will say about this is I really like what they did with Broly's character. Like, they made him like a sort of like demure, naive, innocent like child, but in like a grown man form. And they introduced these new members of the Frieza Force and like this whole dynamic to the Frieza Force. Is Frieza still alive? Yeah, Frieza's still alive. I had to think about that for a second at the end of the movie. I'm like, Frieza fought Broly for like a fucking hour. As for like Broly's like overwhelming power in this movie, I thought it was kind of lazily done because he starts off really weak and then he escalates wildly in power to just ridiculous levels right at the end. It was kind of lazily done. Art style wise, this movie, I wasn't a fan of the actual art style. It uses really heavy line work and sort of like a flat like color palette to give everything a sort of like manga vibe to it. Like, it's like looking at a manga in motion, but I was not a fan of the aesthetics. And during some of the more intense fight scenes, they use like 3D models that look good for 3D models and would look great in like a video game or something. But to suddenly see everyone go from like 2D to noticeably 3D kind of detracts a bit from the visual aspects of it. But yeah, the first part of the movie where you're getting to see like the exile of Broly from planet Vegeta and then the destruction of planet Vegeta, all very good. And then, you know, Broly and Pargus like integrating themselves into the Frieza Force and getting to know the members of the Frieza Force. That's all interesting. But then it just devolves into a long extended fight scene between between Vegeta, then Goku and Vegeta, then Frieza, then Gogeta. It's just this long fight scene. And visually, the directorial style makes it really hard to follow what's happening in the fight. So it's the same problem as Super, except it looks prettier, but it's still the same problem as Super, if not worse, because it's harder to track what's happening with your eyes. The movie itself is okay, it has some really good parts, but it also just kind of gets bogged down at the end with this long fight scene that just goes on for too long and doesn't really have any emotional beats or impact, and they're just, like Super, ineffectually punching each other with nothing noticeable happening. Ascendance of a Bookworm is one of those isekai where they don't really spend any time, like they spend no time in the actual real world. They just immediately jump into the fantasy world, but it also diverges from most of those series that might as well be just fantasy series, in that this show would not work were it not an isekai. The main character's mine is this 6-year-old girl at the start of the show who ends up, after having a terrible fever, wakes up with the memories of a like adult Japanese woman who died of being crushed by books in what is essentially a medieval fantasy world. They did a pretty decent job of portraying medieval times. I mean, obviously there's some anachronisms, but yeah, the level of technology is acceptable enough, I guess. I've definitely seen it done worse. Would have liked to see more guns, but this world also has magic. I'm going on a tangent that no one cares about. Anyway, so this Japanese woman ends up in the body of a 6-year-old girl named Mine, who's like this poor peasant girl, and she really likes books. The problem is that books are really fucking expensive in this time period, and they haven't invented the printing press, so like, she decides that if she can't afford a book, her only hope is that she's gonna make her own books by basically inventing book production methods, like cheaper versions of paper and ink and stuff. The first episode is super slow, and I thought it was going to show, like, I was afraid the whole show was going to be like that, but it really picks up past episode 1, and past that point, I never really feel like the show is wasting my time. I feel like everything it does is going towards a purpose, and it's it's still a relatively, like, calm, slow-paced show, but when you get to the actual end of it, you're surprised at the amount of progress that was made. Like, she ends up, eventually she does create a cheaper alternative to more expensive papers, and she ends up working with, like, a merchant guild and running her own, like, merchant shop. Well, she doesn't run the shop, but you get the idea. She ends up, like, creating, like, a paper production company. So, you are surprised at where the show ends up, really. Like, how much progress is made, because when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like anything's being done, but then you get to the end and you're like, huh, none of the characters were particularly stand out. I mean, they were all, like, likable enough, but there's nothing that really jumps out about this show. It's just genuinely well crafted. Okay, so the Ascendance of a Bookworm OVAs or specials are like 2 10-minute episodes, 12-minute episodes. The first one is about an investigation being launched on the main character from the church, which I won't get into the reasons for that, because if you haven't seen it, I actually think you should. I think it's worth a watch. And then the second episode is about the main character introducing her mom, Mine's mom specifically, her little girl body's mom, to a famous seamstress friend that she made, and then negotiating a trade deal. It might not sound particularly interesting, but honestly, they're pretty entertaining episodes with some laughs along the way. Good time. Ascendance of a Bookworm Season 2 picks up where the first season leaves off, and this is about Mime basically just dealing with her church troubles and, the issues of, like, running a business and expanding her business and stuff like that, and dealing with, like, rubbing elbows with the nobility who fucking hate a commoner getting up all in their biz. Yeah, it was a pretty good episode too, and I really appreciate that we get a little bit more backstory on Mine, and we developed a lot of side characters. I feel like the focus on this was definitely on the side characters, but they don't neglect the main character. They kind of let her grow with the side characters and grow together. Interesting places this seems to be leading off for Season 3, which is apparently confirmed, so I definitely look forward to seeing where this show is going in the future. I want you to make a disgusted face and show me your underwear, too. So, on the first one, which I made a couple years ago, I had the theory that perhaps the relationship you have with these characters is more consensual, and this season definitely disproves that theory completely. You reprise your role as the same, like, rich asshole from the first season, and you even managed to, like, ask 2 of the same girls to show you their underwear. But this season makes it very clear that, because this show is done from a first-person perspective, that your character arranges basically every relationship in your life with women, all of the females in your life, from, like, the maid that you adopted from the streets to the churchgoers to the, like, girls you tutor to the bookstore you go to, even your childhood friends. You have no real emotional connection or attachment to these girls, and every decision you're making in your life, at least revolving around women, is designed completely so that they will show you their underwear, and often you will set up situations which will sort of get their hopes up, and you'll brighten their days only to dash them with your perverse actions, making it so that literally the moment in which you ask to see their underwear is the moment in which it will hurt them the most and damage them the most. Your character is so sadistic and cruel in their actions that there is truly no redemption for you in this show. Because again, this is done in first person's perspective, so this is clearly trying to be you so that you can insert yourself into this. And surprisingly, like, the voice actresses in this, at least most of them, don't really phone this in. Like, they fucking go for it. Like, the bookstore girl, holy shit. They all do such a great job, such an amazing job of conveying the pain and the betrayal that they are experiencing through your character's actions. And what I will have to say is that it's like, this show managed to invoke more emotion from me than like most other anime. Unfortunately, all of these emotions are negative. And this show has basically no redeeming features aside from some well-drawn undergarments. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Vento Oreo is the first JoJo part I've actually watched where I had already read the manga. And honestly, first off, I don't think the Part 5 manga was that great anyway. I gave it like a 5 or something, but it just did not, it either wasn't adapted great or it just did not translate well because it was even worse in the anime version. It has weird pacing as compared to the manga. Certain parts seem sped up and it seems like they moved some stuff around and I don't know. And like the portrayal of King Crimson was really confusing in the anime. And like, I understand the, oh, it just works meme about how King Crimson's ability is supposed to be super confusing and all that, but I understood it fine in the manga, and I thought the manga portrayed it fine. But like in the anime, I know how King Crimson works, and I couldn't even follow what the fuck was happening. It was just so weirdly presented. Giorno, they like made his like ladybugs like blue, so his whole outfit becomes bland and blends together, which is not great. I should have been red. I think it's usually portrayed as red too, so it was a weird like stylistic choice. And they like cut in the Rolling Stone. I think it's Rolling Stone and not I Am a Rock. They cut in the Rolling Stone arc at the end, like right in the middle of the final like in like the final part of the arc, you know? Like they shove a prequel into the middle of the ending and it fucks up the pacing so hard. It's so weirdly fast in places, but also like it's still weirdly slow in other places. Like the whole pacing completely fucked up. It's just such a weird portrayal, Part 5. And of course, the anime has all of the other problems that the manga had on top of the weird adaptation issues. Like the cast is still super uninteresting and lackluster, other than like Bruno and to a lesser degree Trish. Like no one fucking matters. The Diavolo sucks. He's like the worst villain in all of JoJo. He's such a wasted opportunity too, because Doppio would have been such a cooler villain if it was just Doppio and there was no Diavolo. Like, imagine this like demure little weenie actually being the actual secret boss of Passione. Been so much cooler, and it would have went so much better with his theme of anonymity than just being like a dude who has two personalities and changes his body, because Doppio is the last person you'd have expected to be the boss, you know? Whereas Diavolo is just like, grr, I'm Diavolo, I'm an angry stripper man. Like, fuck. The scenes have like a weird lack of gravitas to them, and like, so like it's just like this guy died, oh shit, now he's dead too, oh who gives a fuck, you know what I'm saying? Like the Abacchio, I forget exactly what his name is, because again, none of the characters matter in this fucking part. The moody blues guy, he had like the most impactful death scene, and honestly the best scene in the whole anime. And in the manga it was just like, oh, I guess this guy's dead, nobody gave a fuck about him. I mean, cool that he fucking got the face of Diavolo, but you know, who gives a shit, you know what I'm saying? Also, Part 5 is just like a retread of Part 3, but like slightly better. Like it's just like, here's your motivation, and then the characters go on a journey through like Italy instead of through Egypt, and it's all just an excuse to have one like boring formulaic stand battle after another boring formulaic stand battle. But yeah, it's like, what made Part 5 interesting, and there wasn't a lot because Part 5 was never good, but what made Part 5 interesting just did not translate well. And the parts that were translated just were not translated effectively, I should say. I don't know. All in all, I found Part 5, the anime, to be a lackluster adaptation of a lackluster part. So there we go. That's what I watched recently. This episode definitely ended up taking longer to come out than I expected, but I also ended up watching a lot more anime for this episode than I expected, and for the amount I actually got done in the time it took me, I actually think I was pretty damn efficient on this. But yeah, so whenever I'm not doing this, I'm usually streaming at least 2 days a week on Twitch. I haven't been doing that recently because I have come down with something harsh, but when I get back to it, we'll be starting up Persona 5, The Phantom Strikers, and then I don't actually remember what was next on the list after that. I looked it up. It's Persona 4 Arena Ultimax with the Arena DLC, and then after that, Echo Knight 2, Lord of Nightmares, possibly, and then God of War 1, 2, and 3. So that'll be fun. We'll probably be on that by the time the next episode of this comes out. But yeah, hope you all had fun, and been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.